Hey, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, hello, one and all, once again to the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window. This is part 101. Of course, you can find the Dallas Action in the usual places. Of course, the Wicked Radio Podcasting Network. Our old friends at the Tangent Bound Podcasting Network. Of course, the site where we originate, Spreaker.com, the Spreaker Podcasting Network. That is our hosting site. And look, I can't, just suffice it to say that I cannot say enough good about Spreaker. They are, it's so fantastic, so user-friendly. Thank you to Spreaker. Of course, you can find us on the awesome Stitcher Podcasting Network, the Stitcher for Podcasts app. Also, the Spreaker app. If you're unfamiliar, we are on that. Just download the free app from your Play Store, Spreaker. It's like speaker with an R. Just like Stitcher. And you know what? I found out a lot of the hits that are going to the Spreaker page on our the Dallas Action Spreaker page are coming from Stitcher. I was able to find that out recently. Stitcher's kicking. But we're also on the Satchel Player Podcasting Network, and we are available for free download and listens on the Satchel Player for Podcasts app. And of course, the little site that could, the 22novembernetwork.wordpress.com. That's 22novembernetwork.wordpress.com. The only people that still post over there, me and Dusty, Senor Dusty Road, the great researcher and the great investigative mind, independent assassination researcher. Go to 22novembernetwork.wordpress.com. About September, October, getting into the anniversary every year. Dusty researches and puts together some analysis all year long and publishes it there at our site, 22 November Network, 22 November Network, all word, .wordpress.com every year. And it's always awesome, insightful thinking and analysis. Now, before we get into the meat of the show tonight, once again, just like part 100, our last show, Bad Craziness at No Name Key, where we had big news. On this episode, we've got more big news. So what's going on is, let me tell you, we're going to have to back up. And I'll hit the high points, let everybody know what's going on. But we got some new listeners and some new friends to welcome to the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window. Between the great hardware crash of 2016, or before that, rather, in early December, when we went down for a little bit, I was in contact with Ed Opperman. Some of our listeners may be familiar with his show. It's certainly a lot of people are. His show, The Opperman Report, is gaining ground every day, not only on the Spreaker platform, but on others. And we talked about adding the show to a new radio network, a podcasting network, an independent podcasting network that he was hoping to get on terrestrial radio as well. He wanted to build something from the ground up and asked us to be a part of it, and called the Awake Radio Network. And I was like, sure, man, we'll talk about it. And then we had the hardware crash. And then I went down, and during the thing, we talked a little bit, I think Mr. Opperman sent me an email like, hey, don't let me forget about this, Excuse me, I have some Earl Grey hot with a little cream and sugar right here, spot of tea. Let me get another sip. Sent me an email, don't let me forget about this. And I was like, I'm down, but I'll let you know when I get back up, And so we hooked up with our wonderful presenting sponsor, our title sponsor, Wall Street Window. And as you know, I was able to get everything back up and uploaded a show. Actually uploaded part 100 the day after Christmas. It occurred to me like 4 or 5 days later, oh, well, you know what? I forgot to tell Mr. Opperman about that. And I did. Sent him an email. The next thing I knew, the Dallas Action had been added to the wonderful looking to be pretty cool, pretty awesome, if everything works out right, Awake Radio Network. The show, part 100 of the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window, Mr. Opperman put it on his Spreaker feed at Spreaker.com, and before I knew it, we had a ton of newfound listeners to the show. People finding the show through the Awake Radio Network and the Opperman Reports Spreaker feed. And I want to thank Mr. Opperman. I want to thank Awake Radio and their sponsor, Subash Technosis, for all that, for welcoming the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window to their radio family. I tell you, there are a lot, like I said, a lot of new folks, and I can tell by, I can watch the numbers. Found part 100 of Bad Craziness at No Name Key. And for those who did, I want to say thank you very much for listening to the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window. And if you liked what you heard and you're back to listen to this round, I want to thank you even more. Because I was telling my buddy about the whole thing, and I was telling him about, wow, a lot of people listened to the show in our first weekend with Awake Radio. And he said, well, that's cool. And I said, well, the next show will tell the tale, If folks come back and listen again because they like what they heard, that's awesome. But, you'll also be able to tell if a lot of people went, wow, that guy really sucks. That wasn't interesting at all. I just don't listen anymore. So if you're back, thank you very much. I'm just kidding about that. Well, no, I do that. You try a new podcast. Nah, it's not to my liking. You don't listen anymore. It happens. And also, I found out, I think Mr. Opperman played the show, guys, and this is from my old guard, the crew, the listeners that have been around since day one, when it was the very first show, when 67 people listened, almost 3 years ago. Excuse me. I believe Mr. Opperman actually made arrangements for the last episode, part 100, to be played on terrestrial radio. Real radio stations, not just internet-based. I think 5 local things out west. I don't have the call letters and the locations of those stations yet, but I will, so I can say hello to everybody. But if you have indeed found the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window via one of these stations, one of these independent radio stations, welcome to the show. My name's Doug. It's good to have you. Hope you like what you hear. Let's kick back. Let's do some learning. But I tell you what I want to do. I want to explain what we got going on. This is a JFK assassination studies show. I want to take a moment to let you guys know what we do here. It's not the same old thing. It's not a podcast where you're going to hear 24 minutes broken into 12-minute segments of content split up by commercials, beginning, middle, end. It's not what you're going to hear. That's not what we do. Another thing you're not going to hear on the Dallas Action is me asking you to hit PayPal buttons and give me donations. It's not why we're here. It's not why I do this. That's not why the Dallas Action crew listens and follows along. You're not going to hear a regular parade of 1 to 1.5 hour book commercials for easy content filler. This is not the JFK Assassination Book of the Month Club review. It's not what we do here. We do have notable authors such as longtime friends of the show, Mr. Larry Hancock, the author of Someone Would Have Talked, Nexus, and Shadow Warfare, Mr. Bill Simpich, the author of The 12 Who Built the Oswald Legend, and a seminal work, State Secret. People like that. People like my dear friend, Dr. Walt Brown, the author of Treachery in Dallas, The Warren Omission, The People versus Lee Harvey Oswald. 7, 8 books. I can't think of them all of them now. Dr. Walt Brown, who wrote the 36,000 page, that's right, you heard me right, 36,000 page, 7.5 year project, The Historic Analytical Chronology of the Kennedy Assassination. Dear friend of the show. People like him. We do have those people on, but it's because our studies lead them to their work, and that causes us to ask interesting questions. Thus, we have them on then. That's when we have authors, noted people in the field on the show. And only then. Again, no book commercials here. No. The host actually has to do a little research and legwork. So what do we do here? Think about these things. Think about Occam's razor. Think about Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. What did he say? Once you have eliminated the outright impossible, whatever's left in some way, shape, form, or fashion must be the truth. Occam's razor. Chances are most of the time, the simplest explanation is best. That's what we do here. We apply those. Another friend of the show, a great friend of the show, is a very well-noted scholar and researcher in the field named Douglas Horne. He wrote the 5-volume book, Inside the Assassination Records Review Board, and he's the former chief military records analyst for the AARB. He coined a phrase in a work that made a big impression on me a long time ago, several years ago, and that phrase was, we must be willing to apply the necessary intellectual vigor. And guys, that's what we do here on the Dallas Action. That's what we do. And I'd like to invite you to jump right in and join in. But it's an ongoing study. We endeavor to do just that. Apply the necessary intellectual vigor to declassified government documents, eyewitness accounts and testimony, assassination research archives compiled over the last 50 plus years, continuing investigation and inquiry, and most important, the study of history. We try to apply the necessary intellectual vigor to those things to better apply critical thought and informed analysis to the people, places, things, events, and ideas within the narrative of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. That's what we do here. Now, what you're not going to hear, if you're familiar with the JFK assassination community, it can be a bit tumultuous, to say the least. It's like any sort of historical research discipline where there is a debate factor. It gets catty. Oh, my God. If you're not familiar, just listen to this show and don't get involved, because sometimes it can be ridiculous. If you've ever seen that show Mob Wives, I think that chick, Drita Devanzo, follows along JFK research threads and stuff, trying to, pick up some drama pointers. It can get kind of crazy. We don't engage in any of that on the Dallas Action. This is a study group. A study group of people who are willing to admit we don't have it figured out. We don't have a pet theory. We don't have a theory we're shoving down anybody's throat. We're here because we're still thinking, we're still learning, we're still studying. And that's the way I look at this show. A private study group. I know I said that in the last show, but I want to point that out. What we don't do is entertain the more ridiculous crap, twaddle speak, utter buffoonery out there masquerading as, quote, JFK assassination research, unquote. If you're just joining in our narrative, let me tell you something. We've been doing this for almost 3 years here on the Dallas Action, and there's a core audience that has the audience is built over the last almost 3 years. And this study that we do is a very organic thing. You know, we don't do the hot whatever blah blah topic of the day is here. We don't do that. We're on a course of study together. We read, we research, we analyze, we break down, we add to, we compare, we think critically, we try to. But there are things some things are ridiculous to the point that we do not consider them in our thinking on this podcast anymore, because they have been, after research, after studies, after applying critical thought and analysis, we have deemed to be ridiculous to the point that we do not consider them in our studies. Things like LBJ was the mastermind and his henchman Mac Wallace was in the Texas School Book Depository. No, the people that actually did this wouldn't let a clown like Mac Wallace within 1,000 miles of this covert op in Dallas, baby. We have dismissed this. This notion that the FBI, CIA, AFL-CIO, KGB, State Department, LBJ, Nixon, and every lettered agency and entity under the sun that had something to do with murdering, that hated John Kennedy, had something to do with it, and 1,000 shadowy individuals colluded to pull off both the murder plot and the cover-up and the framing of Lee Harvey Oswald. No, we do not entertain those kind of gargantuan, ridiculous theories, and I'll tell you why. We have learned here, ladies and gentlemen, there's an old intelligence axiom. It's anonymous, but it goes back to the very, very, very birth of covert operations, and it goes like this. And this is rule number one. This is tradecraft rule number one in the kind of world that put together and pulled off the covert operation that murdered John Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. Like this. You ready? The likelihood of an operation being blown is inversely proportional to the number of individuals involved in it. Occam's razor, trim the fat. The murder plot and the cover-up is two separate things. This is a theory we are developing on this show. But that's what we do here. Now, here's another thing. I realize people are jumping in kind of... we're in midstream. You know, we're in mid-stride on this thing. We got a lot of new listeners potentially with the Wake Radio. And, through the Opperman report and things like that. And like I say, thank you again to Awake Radio, the Opperman report, Ed Opperman, and Subash Technosis. Thank you, guys. A lot of people are jumping in midstream. And it's a lot of this information we've gone over a lot, but you guys might not have the context for it, okay? So when I can, what I'll do is I will aim you toward the Dallas Action Archives and a past show, like I say, when I can, that'll give you maybe background info on some of these things, events, people we talk about in the coming shows, where you'll be able to put what you're hearing in a proper context. And a good example is last week, part 100, bad craziness at no name key. If you're not familiar with the secret Cuban war and the secret Cuban ops and these mercenaries, these paramilitary operators that were running these secret covert Cuban ops around the time of Kennedy's assassination, well, I understand that. But we have gone over these guys a lot here. So here's what you do. If you find the show, if you're finding the show, I don't know where, like you're listening on terrestrial radio, go to www.spreaker, Spreaker, like speaker with an R.com I'm about to mess it up. www.spreaker.com/user/7338953. That's the Dallas Actions Spreaker feed. Our archives are there. Now, if you're finding the show on right now, like a lot of folks did, on the Opperman Reports Spreaker feed, here's what you want to do. Go up to the search bar there on the Spreaker page. Just type in The Dallas Action. Hit enter. That should draw up our page, okay? And there you can scroll down through the archives, all right? And for the purposes of context, from the last show, part 100, about Tom Duncan and the Interpin mercenaries and the guys we call the Gunboat Cowboys, the true, real Dealey Plaza hit team suspects. Here's where you want to go. Go, like I said, follow the previous instructions. Part 58, ladies and gentlemen. It was uploaded on June 13th, 2015. About a year and a half ago, part 58. I am a Cuban freedom fighter. Loren Hall, in his own words. Part 58 of the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window. June 13th, 2015, I am a Cuban freedom fighter. Loren Hall in his own words. This is the mercenary Loren Hall. The gun runner, the drug runner, the Cuban freedom fighter, that we talked a little bit about last week. He raised a lot of money for the cause, for the anti-Cuban operations, by delivering inflammatory speeches to hard-right organizations in the early 60s, like the John Birch Society. In this episode, we have a recording from a 33 1/3 vinyl album pressed by the John Birch Society in the summer of 1962 of an inflammatory anti-Kennedy, anti-Castro, and anti-CIA barn burner of a speech that Loren Hall gave to the John Birch Society just a couple months before Kennedy's assassination. It's amazing. Part 58. We listen to most of it. We break it down and analyze it. You'll learn a lot about Loren Hall and a whole lot about why he's important to this story. The very next episode, part 59, it was uploaded 7 days later on June 20th. It's called Combing the Documents, the Dealey Plaza Hit Team. In this, we ran through a big old fistful of declassified CIA documents that link Watergate burglar Frank Sturgis. Now, this is in 1962 and 1963, so he would be future Watergate burglar Frank Fiorini Sturgis, that link him with anti-Castro mercenary, militant, and operator Felipe Vidal Santiago, a number one Dealey Plaza hit team suspect, the man I believe was the mechanic, was the crew foreman in charge of the actual operation in Dealey Plaza. Felipe Vidal Santiago died in April of 64. We followed a document trail linking Sturgis to him from 1962 all the way through the assassination up until his death, until he was captured by Castro on a raid and executed. Frank Sturgis was reporting to a CIA informant every move that Felipe Vidal Santiago, who was the former chief of the Cuban Maritime Patrol, basically until he defected and turned on Castro, he was the, for all intents and purposes, Castro's naval chief of staff. Him and his partner, Pedro Diaz-Lanz, was the former chief of the Rebel Air Force before defecting. These guys were rabid anti-Castro violent militants. Sturgis was reporting every move they made to the CIA. And we followed this document trail, and a lot of what occurred leading up to, not during the time of the assassination, because those documents are missing. And after. Part 87, the Gunboat Cowboys, Roy Hargraves with very special guest, Larry Hancock, we detailed Vidal's loyal subordinate, his loyal lieutenant, mercenary Roy Hargraves, and the absolutely explosive interview that he gave author Noel Twyman for the book Bloody Treason, that Noel Twyman was even too nervous about to publish. We talk about this with Larry. Larry published it in the first edition of his book, his seminal landmark book, Someone Would Have Talked. But cooler heads prevailed because Roy Hargraves really let some cats out of the bag there about some people who were in Dealey Plaza. None of this crazy conspiracy stuff, but the real operators that were there. Kind of what went down, kind of not what went down, alluded to some stuff, but it was so explosive. Lawyers and money and cooler heads prevailed, and Larry was, it's so blockbuster, he was not allowed to publish it in the second printing of his book. We talk about this interview with mercenary Roy Hargraves in part 87, The Gunboat Cowboys, the Dallas action presented by WallStreetWindow.com. If you go back to those, part 58, 59, and 87, guys, listen to those and maybe listen to part 100 again, and you will do what we call gain a little context. So there, we've got all that going on. So now, now that I've got all that stuff out of the way, and again, thank you everybody for being here. Now, on to what we got going on. This is Blowback Part 2, Cubans, Contras, Dope, and Money. Now, before the hardware crash back in November, before we joined the Awake Radio Network, we did a show called Blowback Part 1, Robert Kennedy's War, with guest, my friend, researcher extraordinaire, Ted Rubenstein, who, by the way, I happen to know is very familiar to the Awake Radio Network's audience. We had a series planned, everything kind of crashed. Well, what's happened is we've regrouped. Now, if you want to go back on the same archives, it's part 99, guys, of the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window, part 99. Robert Kennedy's War. Blowback Part 1, Robert Kennedy's War. And we talked with Ted. Ted is on... He was on the trail of putting some things together, some connections together. And that trail began in Florida in the secret Cuban War and continued through the Jim Garrison investigation, the Clay Shaw trial in New Orleans in 1967. Believe it or not, through the trial of Jimmy Hoffa, connections there. And we raised some very valid and a couple of disturbing questions. Namely, this idea that Robert Kennedy was sort of passive and complicit in a passive way in the cover-up. Because he had reason to fear that what happened in Dallas was blowback from either an on-the-books anti-Castro operation sponsored and put together by him and his brother, or maybe, possibly, an off-the-books Kennedy-sanctioned contract on Castro. Remember, we talked about that. Ted talked about some rumors and whispers and rumbles that the Kennedys had actually went to the mafia themselves outside of the CIA with a hit on Castro. Was it, a plot that maybe the CIA wasn't aware of? Well, that was Blowback Part 1, and Ted is still working. Ted is still putting stuff together, and I regrouped, ladies and gentlemen, and what we're going to do here. And we do this kind of thing often. New listeners will be like, what are you doing? I don't understand all this stuff again. You guys are talking about stuff that I don't understand. Well, look, like I say, it's an organic thing. We're just, we got to just hang on for the ride. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to hear a lot of names, but we got to, continue on doing what we do. And what Ted and I decided to do is he is continuing to put some stuff together to go back to 1963, ladies and gentlemen. But we're going to do another thing we do here at the Dallas Action, and we're going to go off. We like to do tangents within a framework. Now, in order for you to understand, maybe, and this goes with my regular guys too, what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to jump ahead. I'm going to do a solo show here and give you guys some foreground information. Foreground information that we will, in turn, apply to background when we go back to 1962 and 1963 with Ted in part 3 of Blowback. Okay? Okay. It'll make sense later. Just hang with me, but it's information you kind of need to know for the foreground. Then when Ted comes back, he's going to pick up, he's going to listen to this, he's going to add to what I've left out, then he's going to come back with some stuff put together, and it's going to be a hell of a thing. It's going to be some good analysis, some good critical thought, I promise, and it's going to be really interesting. Now, for our purposes, and you know what? Ted and I were talking about this on the phone just the other day about how connections, man, you learn new things and you learn about this happened here, maybe years in the future, and you look back and you think about connecting. You go, wow, look at this. And this is an example. Our story begins on this episode of the Dallas Action presented by Wall Street Window 22 years after Dallas. It's Christmas, ladies and gentlemen, 1985. And here again, immediately we have a connection. We have things that remind us of things. It's where this party took place. Remember last week, Tom Duncan, the journalist who was embedded with the Interpen mercenaries in South Florida during the secret Cuban War in 62 and 63, wrote for Soldier of Fortune magazine, published by an ex-mercenary named Robert K. Brown, who was not only embedded with these guys, but very familiar with the extreme ultra-hard right in this country. Because, like most of these mercenaries, they tried desperately to raise funds and equipment from these people all over the country. Especially the same crowd, the same little cell of these cats in the John Birch Society and the CDC out in Southern California, to people like ex-General Edwin Walker, Lauren Hall, and his buddy Lawrence Howard, and of course Interpen's Jerry Hemming, were associated with. Robert K. Brown, publisher of Soldier of Fortune magazine, remember the Drennan document in April of 1963. A few days after, somebody, the Warren Commission and the government in the official story will later ascribe this to Lee Harvey Oswald. Somebody tried to pop ex-General, United States Army General and John Birch Society and hard right leader, General Edwin Walker, in his home. The official story would have you believe that Lee Harvey Oswald did this. See, Brown knew him well too. And the Drennan document, a hard right doctor who gave medical supplies and money and who knows what else to these quote-unquote Cuban freedom fighters, came to the FBI, went to the FBI in April and said that a bunch of serious hard right guys were putting together a plot to murder President Kennedy and others. It was led by General Edwin Walker. And Robert K. Brown was involved, publisher of Soldier of Fortune. Funny thing is, a few days later, Brown went to the FBI and told them, hey, this cat Stanley Drennan is trying to recruit me into a plot to kill Kennedy. Oh, wow. Right. Why is that ironical? Why does that remind us of other things? 22 years after Dallas, Christmas, 1985. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in Florida, and we are at the Christmas party for Soldier of Fortune magazine. That's where we're at. Ladies and gentlemen, in attendance at this party was a guy named Paul Hovind. Paul Hovind was a Vietnam veteran who worked with a lefty nonprofit organization that sought to find and expose United States Defense Department waste. Keep that in mind. Now, this guy, for whatever reason, he ran in paramilitary circles and rubbed shoulders with a few cliques of, all kinds of intelligence types, ex-intelligence types. And at this party, Paul Hovind was taken aside by an older, retired, allegedly, intelligence type by the name of Carl Jenkins. Remember that. Remember that. Now, Jenkins wanted to introduce Hovind. For some reason, he was in a hurry to introduce Paul Hovind to his business partner, another intelligence type / private security dude / ex-spook type fella by the name of Gene Wheaton. Now, Gene Wheaton's career trajectory is something, ladies and gentlemen, to behold. Make no mistake. Gene Wheaton was a serious guy, very, very capable dude. He joined the Marines very young. Then he was a police officer in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And then he joined the Air Force. He was Air Force Intelligence, attached to the Office of Strategic Services. He was an OSS agent, and then for 9 years, then he joined the Army. He became Army Intelligence CID, Criminal Investigation Division. Miss Carolyn Boyce, member of the Dallas Action Honor Roll. Heads up, girl. Army Intelligence again. Wink, wink. Nudge, nudge. After Vietnam, this guy became, surprise, a narcotics counterintelligence advisor to the Shah of Iran himself until 1975. He then spent time working for as a director, some sort of executive assistant director or some such thing for the Rockwell Corporation, and he was the director of security for a company called IBEX, IBEX. And then, ladies and gentlemen, suddenly he drops out completely, falls right out of this amazing and no doubt lucrative career to teach. Yep. From 1976 until 1980, Wheaton taught high school history in San Antonio, Texas. Now, what's important about San Antonio, Texas, ladies and gentlemen, remember, it's right smack in the middle of the 488th United States Army Intelligence Reserve Unit. Right smack in the middle of the territory of the 112th Army Intelligence Reserve Unit, the 112th Army Intelligence Unit. Remember? Colonel Powell, Colonel Wilmoth, James Powell, the plainclothes military intelligence officer who got caught inside the Texas School Book Depository building not 10 minutes after it was sealed up trying to get out. Had to show his ID to get out of the building. Yeah. That's where he taught high school. Then Fort Lauderdale. And then, ladies and gentlemen, a stint as, believe it or not, a psychology instructor. This former military intelligence whiz guy. It's amazing. It's amazing. But I guess he got all of this teaching thing out of his system, Gene Wheaton did. Maybe it was all, not all it was cracked up to be. So he got back into the security business, the security game, and worked as a consultant between 1980 and 1985 in Saudi Arabia, Egypt, 1980 through 1985. Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Pakistan. Do we see a pattern? I do. And then in 85, he gave all that up, ladies and gentlemen, and Gene Wheaton took a gig as vice president of a small cargo airline called National Air. And this is where the story gets juicy. And when Congress approved $27 million in non-lethal aid, unquote, for anti-communist rebels such as the Mujahideen, which later became Al-Qaeda, Wheaton saw an opportunity for his fledgling little airline, National Air, and he recruited his friend, the aforementioned intelligence type Carl Jenkins, to rep him in Washington. And Jenkins used his pull, to get National Air access to the right folks to put in bids on lucrative contracts to fly humanitarian aid to the Mujahideen in Afghanistan and ding, 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 the Contras in Nicaragua. And he thought he was on the track to some awesome big money, you know it? But nothing, not one contract. And Wheaton blamed two people, ladies and gentlemen. He said two guys had a crooked game going on around these contracts and were fixing them for the buddies, for the friends, to their own advantage. And the people he named, the people he blamed, Major General Richard Secord and Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, Iran-Contra. Secord and North. He even complained to the State Department about it to no avail. And Hovind, who, remember, allegedly, quote-unquote, chased government waste, thought he might have a lead here. So he arranged for a congressional staffer on Capitol Hill to meet with Wheaton after this Soldier of Fortune magazine Christmas party. But instead of relating this previous story about these crooked contract shenanigans, Wheaton wanted to talk about political assassinations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is from author David Korn's book, The Blonde Ghost, Ted Shackley and the CIA Crusade. Wheaton was obsessed with the 1976 assassination in Iran of 3 Americans who worked on Project Ibex. He believed the killings were linked to United States intelligence, that a ring of ex-CIA spooks were running wild in Central America and elsewhere. And he started railing about this stuff, right? He skipped completely the presentation on supplying the Mujahideen. Instead, he launched into the speech about political assassinations, rattled on about the mysterious Ibex murders. Hovind apparently had a hard time following Wheaton, claiming, as David Korn writes, that his claims were based on a mishmash of speculative hearsay, fanciful information, and some actual facts. But Wheaton had made his bottom line point very obvious. A rogue element in the U.S. government had engaged in a host of nefarious activities, including assassinations. We're going to stop right there. We're going to give Gene Wheaton the award for the understatement of the century right there. Oh, my God. Or whoever said that. David Korn, whatever. But the congressional staffer didn't want to hear any of this. He didn't want to hear anything about it. But Hovind was very intrigued. And so he called a friend of his. A liberal attorney by the name of Danny Sheehan, and arranged a meeting with Wheaton. And when these two guys finally sat for a meet, Wheaton opened up even more and started naming names. This former military intelligence career guy. Keep that in mind. Wheaton told Sheehan that there existed in the corridors of power in D.C. and beyond a powerful small cadre of super connected former United States intelligence officers. An exclusive club. This network was essentially, Wheaton claimed, an upper-level control group for political assassination, corporate espionage, international drug traffic, and gun running. Big-time narco traffic and gun running. And according to Wheaton, this was a very, very small club. And he named names again. He named Secord, Richard Secord of Iran-Contra fame, who was an ex-ONI CIA agent. Convicted, imprisoned gunrunner Edwin Wilson, remember that name. Legendary CIA spook Thomas Klein, the man who ran the CIA's secret Laotian War, along with David Morales. And the man Wheaton said ran this whole network, even up through 1985. A name very familiar to all who study the Kennedy assassination, former JM Wave Station Chief Theodore Ted Shackley. Sheehan, the journalist, according to David Korn's book on Shackley, believed Wheaton, and in mid-1986, he actually went out of his way, and he visited ex-Central Intelligence Agency Op Ed Wilson in prison. See, Ed Wilson had been convicted of gun running in Libya. Wow, does any of that sound familiar? Quick aside here. The great Douglas Adams, who wrote Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, this is a quote. Those of us who do study history are doomed, beyond doomed, to stand by helplessly and watch as those who do not constantly repeat it. Convicted of gun running in Libya. Imprisoned. Bad guy. Sheehan went to see him and asked him about what Wheaton said. Again, from David Korn's book on Ted Shackley, the imprisoned rogue officer made Sheehan's head swim. The essence of Wilson's story, Sheehan claimed, was that the agency in 76 had created a highly secretive counterterrorist unit modeled on the PRUs of Vietnam and had run this entity apart from the main bureaucracy. The mission, Wilson told Sheehan, conduct wet operations, assassinations. After the election of Jimmy Carter, this group was erased from the books by Stansfield Turner and hidden in private companies. And Shackley, that must have been dyslexia. Let me stop. This group was erased from the books, not Stansfield Turner, sorry. And hidden in private companies. And Shackley was the man in charge of the unit both in and out of government. The program was divided into different components. CIA man William Buckley allegedly had directed one out of Mexico with a guy named Ricardo Chavez and a guy named Quintero. Another unit, according to Wilson, was headed by a former Mossad officer. Cuban exile CIA operative Felix Rodriguez was involved in yet another one in the Middle East. Wilson went into such detail, Sheehan later maintained, it's not something that's being made up. It's not something that's being made up. Sheehan applied the resources of his small Christic Institute to the case. Wheaton continued investigating. Another attack of dyslexia. We're still reading from Korn's book here. Sheehan knitted together all this spook gossip and misinformation with a few hard facts, and on May 29, 1986, he dropped the load. Basically, ladies and gentlemen, he filed the lawsuit that exposed, based on what Wheaton was telling him, he filed the lawsuit that exposed the Iran-Contra affair. He certainly did. Wheaton was responsible for a lot of this. This military intelligence guy, Army intelligence, ex-Air Force guy, coming forward, not only implicating the CIA in assassinations, but exposing this whole thing. I'm going to come back to that too. Wheaton, he gave an interview to a show called Declassified Radio in 2002. And I want to read you a little bit about what he says. This stuff goes back to the scandals of the 70s, Gene Wheaton said, of Watergate and Richard Helms, the CIA director, being convicted by Congress of lying to Congress, of Ted Shackley and Tom Clines and Richard Secord and a group of them, being forced into retirement as a result of the scandal over Edmund P. Wilson's training of Libyan terrorists, moving C4 explosives to Libya. They decided way back when, 75, 76, during the Pike and Church Committee hearings, that the Congress was their enemy. They felt that the government had betrayed them and they were the real heroes in this country, and that the government became their enemy. In the late 70s, in fact, after Jerry Ford lost the election in 76 to Jimmy Carter, and then these guys became exposed, by Stansfield Turner, that crowd, for whatever reason. Ted Shackley, Vernon Walters, Frank Carlucci, Ving West, and a group of these guys, he said, used to have park bench meetings in the late 70s in McLean, Virginia. Wheaton exposed this bunch. Now, what's all this got to do with 1963? Why, how is this foreground going to help us form better background for when Ted Rubenstein comes back? We're going to go back to 63 now. Kinda. Because, ladies and gentlemen, Wheaton came out of the closet with some information. This military intelligence officer alleged to have information on the John Kennedy assassination in 1995 during the time of the AARP. Matter of fact, he wrote him a letter. I'm going to read you this letter now. I am faxing you one-page prepared report by a retired CIA officer who was a very close friend of mine in the mid-'80s. Our friendship was so close that I kept a bedroom in his home in Arlington, Virginia, socialized with him and his wife, herself a high-level active CIA officer, and for a while was virtually with them 24 hours a day. Wheaton wrote to the Assassination Records Review Board in 1995. Through him, I met many of the Bay of Pigs veterans, both Cuban and American. We had many intimate discussions about covert operations, Kennedy assassination. He was totally in charge of infiltrating sabotage and assassination teams into Cuba from 1960 onward. I had discussions with him and one of his key Cuban agents about obtaining immunity for them if they would come forward about their knowledge of involvement in the Kennedy assassination plots. So now he's coming to the AARB saying, hey, I am a ex-Army and Air Force intelligence guy with knowledge of the Kennedy assassination. And now he's going out on a limb offering immunity to witnesses on his own? Strange. This man's programs included JM Wave, Mongoose, ZR Rifle, among others, operating out of the Miami station. If you think I can help, we will have to meet Dr. Tunheim. Has my bio. If you need another copy, please let me know. Note, the United States Marine Corps Reserve unit that my associate established was in the New Orleans area. Lee Harvey Oswald, hint, hint, to act as a cover for his CIA Latin American operations. United States Marine Corps Reserve Unit established in New Orleans, CIA Latin American operations, early 60s. I had blanked out his ID until we can discuss this further, but ladies and gentlemen, he later sent an undated note on National Airlines notepaper to the Assassination Records Review Board that says, Carl Jenkins was my National Air Washington, D.C. rep. He connected me to Nestor Pino, Bill Bode, Rob Owen, Vaughn Forrest, Chichi Quintero, Nestor Sanchez. Let the cat out of the bag. Right there, ladies and gentlemen. And named his buddy Carl Jenkins as the man who had the knowledge. His ex-CIA buddy, people like Ted Shackley, Clines, Chichi Quintero, Felix Rodriguez. This network this out-of-government network. Not only did he rat him out once, he's trying like hell to rat him out twice, isn't he? Isn't he? But what do these names have to do with Dallas? With Robert Kennedy, with possible blowback on the Kennedys? It's because an inordinate number of these people, guys, people mentioned here, were, in the early 60s, involved in a thing called Operation M-Trunk. An anti-Castro covert operation initiated by the Kennedy brothers and spearheaded by Robert Kennedy, along with the Kennedy brothers' more CIA-critical allies in the State Department. It was a covert op, and it was an operation that no less than Bill Sempich calls a Mickey Mouse op foisted upon an unwilling JM wave that reveals that RFK really had no idea how to properly put together a covert op. And ladies and gentlemen, these people we've been talking about, these intelligence professionals, these black op professionals, how do you think they felt about having that operation foisted upon them? Well, next time on Blowback Part 3, Ted Rubenstein is coming back. And we're going to take this foreground for background that we've learned today, right here on this episode of the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window. And we're going to follow Ted back to 1962, 1963. Ted Rubenstein is going to help us fill in the blanks, and we're going to get into Robert F. Kennedy's dealings within this nest of vipers who were waging the secret Cuban War. I can't wait. I hope you guys will come back and check it out too. That's next time right here on the show. Well, listen, this has been part 101 of the Dallas Action, presented by Wall Street Window. I'm glad you came back. Glad you guys tuned in. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for playing along. I'm Doug. I'm out.
The Opperman Report is brought to you by SubhashTechnosis.com. Subhash Technosis is a search engine optimization and website design company located in India. So you know you're going to save a lot of money and get top quality service to boot. They offer all kinds of services, business process outsourcing, data entry, banking BPO services, recruitment process outsourcing, software testing, offshore research networking, customer care, press release content writing and distribution, and much, much more. They offer website development, e-commerce solutions, mobile responsive designs. Now, I've personally worked with Subhash for over 10 years. This is the man that puts out my press releases. They've done work on my websites, so I can personally recommend SubhashTechnosis.com. You can find a link to Subhash Technosis at OppermanReport.com and also AwakeRadio.us. Welcome to our new sponsor.